Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the October Audit and Finance Committee meeting. Hopefully everybody survived in, and we appreciate your being here today. As you have seen, we've got a long agenda, so we're going to make up today for those days that we were able to get out in a short period of time. So just bear with us as we get through this agenda today. I will call the meeting to order and ask for approval on the adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Are there any corrections or changes to the minutes? If not, I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes as approved, as presented.
Motion to approve.
Second.
So the first thing on the agenda is we've heard over the last few months some, brief reporting of the disparity study that was started, I think, in 2021. And the consultants that have been working with the district on completing that study is coming to the end of the study, and they are going to give us a preliminary briefing today. This is not the final report, but they're going to kind of give us a status report on what they've come up with to this point. So I'm going to turn it over to Shauna for her to make the introductions.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Just as background context, in 2021, the district was commissioned with looking at the capital building program as well as procurement practices associated with the disparity study. We put a solicitation out based on that scope of work, and the work was awarded to Miller 3 Consulting Group. Mr. Dave Miller and Ms. Sherry Williams, they're part of today's meeting. They're the lead consultants on this, and today what we anticipate presenting is the preliminary findings, recommendations, as well as some remediation items that we have put in place to date based on the outcome of the disparity study so far. I'll turn it over to Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Ms. Williams, and to board members Green and Coates and the entire Audit and Finance Committee meeting. Sherry, I believe you may have screen sharing privileges. So if you would just pull up the deck for us, we will commence the discussion. And if you would, place it in slideshow.
And I'm going to ask everyone if you would mute your phones or your devices. Thank you.
While Sherry's bringing it up, let me take the opportunity to thank the school district for the opportunity to provide this disparity study for you all. The period we looked at to cover this comprehensive disparity study included fiscal year 16 through fiscal year 21. And as you can imagine, that covered both pre-COVID activity as well as during COVID activity. And so we are excited to be here before you. And I want to give some acknowledgements for this body in moving forward courageously in conducting this study.
Yeah, I'm clicking on screen share, Dave. So we may just have to do it as is.
All right, so just enlarge the screen at the bottom right-hand side to something that's appropriate. And if you could just drag them, perfect, yep. So again, thank you, Audit and Finance Superintendent, for commissioning this disparity study and allowing Miller 3 to perform it. Next slide, please. Before is an outline of this discussion today, I will cover briefly a little bit about our background and experience, how we got to this point, the legal framework, which governs the disparity study in and of itself, share at a very high level the approach and methodology, some of our statistical findings and recommendations that we are making before and for consideration for the board and the district. Next slide. So a little bit about us. We are the creators of the disparity study industry. We conducted our very first disparity study in 1988. The prevailing legal framework, the Croson decision, came out in 1989. And in our study in 1988, we correctly anticipated the direction of the courts. We've been doing this for over 30 plus years. We are based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and the map to the right sort of gives you an idea of our national practice. As it relates to the district for which, the circuit for which the district sits in, the Fourth Circuit, we have currently either completed or in the process of completing disparity studies, and we've done at least 8 in that area. Clearly, as a result, during the disparity study, we rely heavily upon district staff as well as local players, and so we have a very strong subcontracted team to include local firm Coastal Focus, as well as a research firm who assisted us in our surveying elements. Next slide, please. So the legal framework. I mentioned the Croson decision, where the U.S. Supreme Court is set forth the precedent that must be considered when conducting a disparity study, and where there's a compelling government interest and a factual predicate supports it. The test is whether or not the district has been an active participant in discrimination or a passive participant in discrimination. Said differently, if your policies and your practices in and of itself are resulting in discriminatory practices which will make you active, or as a byproduct of the vendors for which you do business with, if their activities in the marketplace makes you a passive participant in discrimination. And once the factual predicate is completed, then a narrow tailoring must be done to help remedy the inferences of identified discrimination found. Next slide. A little bit more about our approach and methodology. We institute a 10-part methodology, which consists of an industry analysis, a statistical analysis, as well as a market analysis. And each of these components lends itself to our conclusions and recommendations. The legal analysis simply outlines the legal standards. I mentioned Richmond v. Croson, as well as Adirond and Pena and their progeny, particularly in the Fourth Circuit. The procurement and Mbe culture and systems analysis, both quantitatively and qualitatively, examines the district's current contracting practices to determine its impact on the culture and systems of MWB's ability to do business with the district. The relevant market analysis seeks to determine the geographical boundaries within for where the county performs a substantial part of its business activities. We define substantial as 70 to 75%. The availability component is, quite frankly, the most contentious part of a disparity study. And inside of that, we're determining what firms meet the RWA criteria. RWA is the acronym for ready, willing, and able. Utilization component is one of the most straightforward components of disparity studies. In short, it is who you are actually procuring goods and services from. Then we make some adjustments related to capacity. Then the marketplace analysis seeks to address any other services that are available in the marketplace that helps better prepare minority and women-owned businesses to be viable resources for district opportunities, to include our race and gender analysis, where we are speaking to executive directors of management and technical assistance providers in determining what they view as success. In those discussions, we are less interested in output, but more interested in outcomes. And the output is around how many businesses that you serve. The outcomes around whether or not your serving of those businesses lended itself to them being more viable in the marketplace and opportunities for them to be successful in providing their goods and services. And as I mentioned, that leads up to our customized conclusions and recommendations, for which we will share some of the high-level salient recommendations as a part of this presentation. Next slide. So let's go right into the statistical findings. We first start with a determination of your relevant market. Again, looking at activity from fiscal year 17 through fiscal year 21, and we separate the district's activity across the procurement types that are listed there. One of the more interesting findings in conducting this disparity study is historically we tend to see A&E services as well as construction and construction-related services, relevant market being defined as a local area, more consistent with a local area, whether or not it's the city of Charleston or a broader area, the MSA of Charleston. But what we found is the proponents of your services are coming from either at the state level or firms located outside of the MSA, or from a national-wide perspective in terms of construction-related services. So this slide here really depicts your MBE utilization by relevant market. I want to first talk about this slide from the overarching total dollar perspective. And so I want to draw your attention to the last line. And the way this table works is it looks at your purchase orders, your accounts payable, and your contracts data, because we look at utilization at those three distinct points: at the point of award, which is your contract dollars; as a point of contract execution, which is the issuance of a purchase order, and then what is reflected in the PO column, and then as you make payments against those purchase orders. And so the takeaway here is that based on purchase orders, there's just shy of 17% of the district spend went to minority and women-owned businesses. And you can see the individual percentages for minority firms as compared to women-owned firms. For accounts payable, very similar, just shy of 17%, distributed across minorities at 7%, 7.12%, and then WBEs at 9.29. If we shift up to look at the individual procurement types, you are seeing the same distribution consistent with the relevant market that was previously presented. And so you can see some variances where MWBEs may be faring better in some instances and provides opportunity areas in others. Next slide, please. The next series of slides will have the very same look. They are comparing utilization, which is in blue, to availability. And this first slide starts with A&E. And so for each of the disparate groups here, you see at the very bottom, the blue is representing the district's utilization, and the orange is representing the district's, their representation in terms of availability. And so without going through each of them, given, as Ms. Green indicated at the outset, this is a fairly lengthy agenda item, and for the spirit of brevity, we'll just sort of flash through these, and I'll just sort of note and pause for a brief second to allow you to embrace and observe how the utilization and availability shifts as we move across procurement types. And so this is A&E, construction and construction-related services. Non-professional services, and I'll pause here for a second just to sort of highlight and preview the disparity component. When conducting a disparity analysis, we are looking at the proportion of a respective ethnic group's availability compared to that proportion of utilization. And so when you see utilization exceeding availability, the disparity ratio would perceive that as being overutilization. And so if I look at non-MWBE here, as well as African Americans, you see where the blue outpaces the orange, that will represent overutilization. If we look at WBEs, you see there's a more closely knit alignment between utilization and availability. And that's really what we're trying to get to, is parity. Next slide, please. Similar you see for goods and supplies, which is depicted here. Next slide, please. Yeah. So here's the disparity ratio concept. It's a fairly elementary concept where we're comparing the proportion of utilization compared to the proportion of availability. We're testing to see if we reach parity. Parity is indicated by the red diagonal line, which says that your percent utilization by the district's activity is reflective of your representation in the marketplace. Where availability exceeds utilization, you will fall below that line. And underutilization, then we test that for significance, whether or not it reaches significance or not. When utilization reaches statistical significance, an inference of discrimination can be gleaned from that, and programmatic initiatives can be developed as a result of it. Next slide, please. This is just a picture. You may have to take my word that at the very bottom of this is each of the respective procurement categories: A&E, construction-related services, goods and supplies. The point I want to note here is the black horizontal line is an indication of parity. All the red bars that exceed above, so red indicates significance. Any bars that are below the parity line indicate significant underutilization. Next slide, please. So some of the observations we glean that may be impacting the district's ability to reach its goals around MWBE participation are all captured in our procurement findings, and there's a fairly exhaustive and lengthy procurement chapter that supports this. But at a very high level, some of the practices that impact the procurement findings, whether or not it's perceived incumbent bias by the program managers or the impact of emergency procurements, usage of a now defunct practice of direct negotiations, all those things impact the ability for the district to meet its stated MWBE objectives. Next slide. As a byproduct of the disparity study, there's both a quantitative component of it, for which I just sort of share with you, as well as a qualitative component. And inside the qualitative component, we're really trying to understand perceptions and experiences when attempting to do business. And so we conducted some public-facing components of it to include 3 focus groups, some one-on-one interviews for which we had a lot of participation there, and we have a pending public hearing that's scheduled for the 13th of October. But some of the themes that came out as a result of the focus groups and one-on-ones is a perception that to know someone is advantageous to participating. There's a perception around biases, and those create some frustration for businesses. There's also a perception that seemed to have existed for the participants around the lack of knowledge and understanding the business process and the procurement process and the impacts of not having forecasted opportunities. And then there appears to be little connectivity to the vendor community. These are just themes that participants share in their experience in trying to do business with the district. Next slide, please. So in terms of recommendations, and we titled this sort of the mission critical components, your programmatic initiatives can be addressed for those that are highlighted in blue. And what that represents is where there was an inference of discrimination that was gleaned based on the quantitative components of the study. And so, for example, in A&E services, all but WBEs, the district can consider race-conscious initiatives to redress the inference of discrimination that was identified. Conversely, in non-professional services, there are no race-conscious initiatives that can be put in place by the district based on we recognize that the Hispanic American-owned firms, while they are showing disparity in terms of being underutilized, that disparity did not reach statistical significance. Next slide, please. And it's sort of lastly around recommendations that we will make, enhancement to your some of your MBE processes, procedures and practices, long-term availability and capacity building initiatives. The district has done a really good job in leveraging some tools. Some of those tools are now defunct, but what those tools had allowed for is the building of capacity for businesses. We are encouraging the district to continue its efforts in that space to address capacity. We love the fact that this client is a school district because you have the ability to mold minds, and you couple molding minds with understanding what the buying needs are, and you can begin to leverage entrepreneurship programs as a byproduct of educating kids. And then lastly, I will sort of highlight the promoting MWBE participation at the prime level. While in some procurement types, the district has done well in this space, in others, there remain opportunities. And next slide, please. And so in the spirit of brevity, I wanted to at least capture the high-level points in terms of our findings and recommendations as a result of conducting the disparity study. Myself, along with Sherry Williams, are here to field the project manager. Sherry served as project manager for this effort, are here to field any questions that this body may have as a result of hearing very quickly in learning of some of the findings and recommendations. And so, Ms. Williams, I turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Okay, that was fast. A lot of information. Committee members, do you have any questions for the consultants?
So question, you mentioned this is preliminary. What part's still evolving? And also, I guess, coming back to ourselves, to maybe to our team, what are the next steps with this?
In terms of those that are evolving, we're just sort of finalizing. We've shared the body of the document with the district. We are taking into account the district's reaction and comments to that. And once we make whatever adjustments to the report as a result of the district's responses to what has been written, they will then reflect finality.
There also is an engagement session left. Can you speak about that, Mr. Miller?
Yes, there's a public hearing scheduled for the 13th. That public hearing is the last part in terms of the record that supports the disparity study. That public hearing, we're asking businesses to come out and share their perception and experiences. And so if you did not complete the survey, or if you did not participate in a focus group, or were not selected for the one-on-one interviews, this is your opportunity to share, to ensure that is a part of the record.
And Mr. Griffin, if I can shed some light on where we are with the district. So we received the report, it's several hundred pages. And so we've been digesting each chapter, making sure that the clarity is there between what's provided and our interpretation, providing any feedback, questions, comments. And the Miller team has been great at getting back to us and kind of going through that with us. So that's how we've been engaging during this review.
Thanks.
Any additional questions from anyone on the committee? I guess from it's a lot of information, and I probably have more questions than I want to bring up here. But I guess if I could ask just one general question about the overarching theme of making sure that the district is aware of minority contractors to do business with. Are we missing the boat on that at all? I mean, were you able to identify, when you look at those availability versus utilization, are we missing something in terms of the availability of minority vendors that we are not using? Is that even a fair question?
I think the question is fair. And I think the district has done a fairly good job of reaching its participation goals. I'll put forth that many times that is a result of concentration, right? And so while you are reaching the goal, the question becomes whether or not the diverse pool of firms who are allowing for you to reach that goal is in fact diverse. And so we put forth there's some opportunities for the district to have a little less reliance upon or having a concentrated effort with certain vendors, and to be more inclusive, to be more diverse, and to really have, particularly as some tools are no longer in the tool belt, but to ensure that the results of utilizing those tools have been embraced by the decision makers who are making the buy decision to make sure that MWBEs are participating equitably with their availability in the marketplace.
Ms. Green, I'd like to add to that as well. So as an overarching theme, how the district does business, the state has a 10% MBE participation requirement. The district has a 20%. We've met our goal pretty consistently. I know for fiscal 22, we've exceeded that goal. So to Mr. Miller's point, it's not that we're not meeting the goal. It's more so on making sure our practices and approaches are equitable. That said, as the report was being developed and we would have check-ins with the Miller Group, we kind of course corrected some items. So for instance, we have the $250,000 list, over 250 that now comes to the board for transparency. We also mitigated by making sure that our competitive bid processes were just that, competitive bid, by eliminating the direct negotiations. As well as we're launching an internal audit just to look at all of our procurement practices and procedures that's happening this current fiscal year. So we are, to Mr. Miller's point, concentrating and paying attention to it.
Thank you. Okay, I will probably want to reach out to you, Mr. Miller, personally, because like I said, I do have some questions just from a matter of understanding, and also want to work with the district in making sure that the recommendations are applicable and that we can implement, those that we can. So before I conclude this section, I want to make sure that we don't have any more questions from any of the other committee members. Well, thanks to both of you for your work. It's been a while coming, and I mean, we know a lot of things went into why that was, but we are happy to now be kind of getting to the end of that process, and I look forward to talking to you further.
Sure, and I welcome any questions you have, particularly those that speak to any recommendations that the board would like to implement, and we'll avail ourselves to help you in any post-study support efforts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the 2017-2022 capital program, phase 4 sales tax. Tom, is that Tom?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have on my right glasses, Tom, so I can't read it, so sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Green and committee members. So the first thing I have today is a request to reallocate funding in the amount of $6,224 from project 5292 or 25292. Basically, we're sweeping up some excess funds from projects that have been completed in years 1 through 6 in order to purchase more student devices. The devices themselves really aren't end of life, but Google has stopped support of them, and we have to replace them.
Any questions on this request from committee members? If not, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. You can keep going, Tom.
Yes, ma'am. So the second one is a request for a motion to approve the attached technology replacements and upgrades 6-year plan for phase 5 sales tax. Basically structured the exact same way as it was last phase. We did remove several projects that are no longer supported. For instance, bulbs for projectors, printers, document cameras. We took out the contingency project. So Other than that, the projects are basically the same to take care of infrastructure, student mobile devices, and technology backfill, which is basically rooms that need technology added. Any questions?
This is not necessarily related to this, but how do you feel about where we are from? I know we can't get into a lot of detail, but are you good with where we are with our security measures, Tom? Every time I hear something on TV, I have to ask.
Well, I'm glad I come to mind every now and then. So honestly, yes, ma'am. From a hardware and software standpoint, I really appreciate the support of this committee and the board. I do feel comfortable. It's our user training that I think could use some attention, if anything. But from a financial standpoint, that wouldn't help that area.
Okay. All right. We're relying on you. Every time I hear it, I'll ask.
Oh, yes, ma'am. I know that.
All right. So I'll entertain a motion on this particular item.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Next one.
It's Tom and Ron, Tom and Steve.
Okay. So Tom and Stephen.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Green. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Now, I'll brief the first portion of this motion. This addresses our Phase 4 capital sales tax reallocation recommendation and a recommendation to approve reallocating funds to some projects that were different from the approved plan. Just want to address some of the words that I put in the background. I used a dollar figure here that really kind of undercut a bigger picture that I was trying to make here. We still, going into our Phase 5 program, had about a $267 million backlog in our maintenance and repair program. And even though we have a pretty robust Phase 5 plan, there's still some opportunities that I think we could use the excess for Phase 4 to get at this backlog. We will still be, even with our Phase 5 plan, still above $200 million in our backlog. And we've developed some projects that we would like to reallocate that would certainly address that and hopefully keep us on pace and letting us get too far behind in our maintenance and repair strategy. So pending your questions, our recommendation for the first piece of this, the capital maintenance piece for our reallocation to the 10 projects that you see there.
Any questions?
So are these projects that were on the capital repair and maintenance backlog list that are now be able to pull forward with the savings that we have, or are these?
Well, they were on the Phase 4 plan as unfunded, or either not being complete with the funding that we had for our Phase 4 program.
So they don't address the backlog issue at all. Right.
Well, they do. Well, they do. They're still part of our backlog. So I think to your point, it does address reducing that backlog. These would not have been done if we weren't able to use this reallocation, or not be done or completed.
Okay.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
Can you stand by one the screen?
Pardon?
Part of this is Mr.
Oh, I'm
Rock.
sorry.
He can go.
There's another
Proceed.
part to this.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yes, ma'am. So the second part of this is technology replacements and upgrades. We're asking for 15.7575 million to go into 3 different projects, all of which were on the original Phase 4 plan. Basically, we're working in a condition assessment rating plan. Our PA systems are aging severely, and we don't have a normal funding process for life cycle management. So this will allow us to put a more robust system in all of our schools as we are in new construction, which will tie into security, surveillance, and other areas, as well as the teacher use for sound reinforcement. The other part is going to the year 1 Promethean panels from the Phase 4 plan. We need to upgrade the operating system, which is basically a module that we can replace. And then also Chromebooks that no longer are supported by Google. Again, they're limiting us to 4 years before they require us to buy a new device and a license. So we're kind of forced into that there.
Can I add to that, Ms. Green?
Sure.
So if I can add to what Mr. Naraki said, just as a bit of a background, when we went from phase 4 to phase 5, we reduced the sales tax expenditure proposal for IT by $11 million. We didn't have a very detailed assessment of the life cycle management. Tom had a pretty good estimate, but now that he's experienced a lot of these systems being replaced, he's come up with a really good detailed analysis of what it will take to provide adequate life cycle replacement for devices, individual devices, classroom devices, and infrastructure for the school district. So at this point, we've got a really good handle on where those numbers stand, and this will support Tom in those efforts.
So is that basically a $15 million a year run rate? Because this is year 6, right? So is it $15 million a year thereafter, presumably?
Well, we have 3 buckets of money for technology replacement. We've got fixed cost of ownership, we've got sales tax, we've got general operating fund. If you add all 3 up, Tom, it's 21 million, correct?
If we had all of our funding sources, it's 15 million. And our life cycle cost is about 21 million annually.
Does that answer your question, Steve?
It does.
Stephen, okay. Are there any other questions? So the total on this particular request is the 41.3, is that right?
20.75. The total reallocation of 20.75 million.
Yeah, it's a reallocation of what was previously 41 million. We've got 20.75 million savings in spots that's being redistributed to these 3, largely these 3 components, primarily 3 components.
See it now. Okay, thank you. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The next item is the 2010-2016 capital building program, sales tax budget reallocation. Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Ms. Green and committee members. So for the phase 3 program, as a result of completing our brand new emergency operations center located at Bridgeview, as well as a reimbursement that we received from Mount Pleasant Waterworks for our Jenny Moore Elementary project, we are requesting to reallocate $187,274 to the district-wide athletic funding project. This completes my reporting for the phase 3 program.
Questions? Motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next item, Ms. Shaw, 2017 through 2022 capital program, phase 4 sales tax budget reallocation.
Okay, for the phase 4 program, as a result of completing and closing 12 projects, we have $22.4 million of project savings, which is a significant accomplishment with the assistance of our Cummings Construction Management Group. We will like to use $21.8 million of that savings to the projects that's listed in this board item, and the remaining balance to go to program contingency. Pending any questions, that completes my phase 4 reporting.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the savings.
Yeah, we're excited about it. Thank you.
Yeah, you should be. Any questions from the committee? If not, will entertain a motion.
Quick question. Can any of the contingency or can any of this go to the repairs and maintenance backlog? Is that, I mean, obviously you all are evaluating where you think the priority, where the needs are, of course. But there's a little bit of contingency. Can that, every little bit matters, I assume, on our backlog.
I can address that, Ms. Shaw. So that's a really good point, Mr. Griffin. We'd like to hold off on reallocation of all of the excess revenues at this point. We believe that the projects that Ms. Shaw has here are critical projects and take priority over additional funding added to capital maintenance at this time. But we still have excess revenues left in phase 4 that we can determine a disposition on after the end of the sales tax program is completed. Well, it'll be completed at the end of this calendar year.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so moving right along, Ms. Shaw, you are still with us here on the 2023-28 capital program.
For our phase 5 capital programs, we have, just as we did earlier in the year with our wave 1 projects within phase 5, we are coming with the wave 2 projects under the phase 5 program. The commodities and materials still remain at an all-time high as of today, and we are looking to reallocate $25.8 million of phase 5 projected revenues within our program. We are also looking to reallocate $12.4 million for District 9 elementary school project. Many of you who have been a part of the community meeting that we had back in June, as well as the presentation that we presented to the board, I believe a month ago or so, you would have seen that the roundabout within the conceptual design layout is being a requirement from the South Carolina Department of Transportation that we add that as a part of this project. Also, when we looked at the future growth for the D9 elementary school, we initially started at 600 students, but as the projection showed, they have about, I believe, 684 students in fiscal year 28. So to accommodate that increase in that population for future growth, we increased the student population to 700 students come day one when we open up the school. So that gives us a total request of $38.2 million for our phase 5, wave 1, as well as wave 2 projects. That completes my reporting. Pending any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Shaw on this particular item? So does this give us everything we need to get the District 9 started, the school started? I mean, I know the design and all of that has to be done, but that should take care of us for a minute.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Any questions? If not, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Ms. Shaw, you have the 2023 through 28 capital program, long-term debt budget reallocation.
Yes, ma'am. So for the long-term debt projects, we are requesting a reallocation of $22 million. And that too also addressed the increase in commodities and market escalations that we've been seeing today. That includes A.C. Cochran, Deer Park, as well as Morningside Middle School. In addition, we have an item called Midland Park land purchase, and Angela just got back the final assessment. And so we know exactly what that number is going to be, which is up as high as $7 million. So total, again, we're requesting $22 million increase for the long-term debt projects. That completes my reporting, pending any questions.
And so when you say long-term debt projects, meaning this is all going to be incremental borrowing? Is that what that means?
I think I'll turn it over to finance when it comes to the borrowing piece.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So this $22 million, this is all incremental borrowing to fund all of this? Is that what I'm understanding?
So for the long-term debt, there's a couple of different issuances, but this particular one is covered with our regular bond that we issue. So that covers long-term debt, short-term debt, and obligations that we have.
But it's still, I think to answer your question, Stephen, it's my understanding that this would be an additional request at the 8%. Remember when we did the 8% to do some construction last year? I think this is an add-on to that amount.
Right. So it does sound like we're borrowing
Yeah.
$1 million more to fund
Well, I look at it.
what it sounds like.
He's asking whether
And
additional borrowing.
and could these items not have been funded by the previous
Already have some?
sales tax savings and or excess revenues that we had received? I guess
Okay, well.
they could not have been.
Okay, I may have misguided you, so let Shauna explain this again.
Right, so I'm sorry, I thought, Mr. Griffin, you were asking, are we about to go to market to cover the funds for this? This is a reallocation of money that we already have. We're not about to do a new issuance to cover this. This is residual funds that we already have available from a prior bond issuance that we've done. So this is reallocating that fund to these projects identified. And it's really just, these are related to cost inflation, right? Yasmin, the 22.
That's correct.
Right. So we talked about this. So these are already approved. The funds are already available. There's revenue already on the books to cover this. And the reason the cost is exceeding, or the additional 22 million is needed, is because of inflation related to the cost of materials goods sold.
Yeah, I'm certainly sympathetic and understand that construction projects around the country have all gone up quite a bit for a variety of reasons. I was just trying to understand where, if this was already approved, where, if this is a reallocation, I guess I still don't totally follow where it's a reallocation from. Like if we had the revenues, or is this excess revenues that we collected somewhere? I guess that's what I'm not totally following.
Oh, Joyce, would you like to jump in on this part, please?
And Kent, I know that's you and not Stephen. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Yes, thank you. On April 26, 2021, the board approved these 4 projects, 3 schools and 1 land project, that were on the Phase 5 approved project list. These 4 items were below the line of delineation, which we have for our projected funding. The board wanted these 4 projects moved up, funded, and accomplished. So it was determined to borrow in a long-term debt fashion. These bonds will not mature until 2030 or 2032. I'm not sure. So that is the long-term goal there. So it was originally approved, these 4 projects were 77.5 million. And per Jasmine's presentation, an additional 22 million is needed, which will all be long-term debt out till 2030.
Yeah, so we will need to borrow incrementally from what we had previously anticipated to fund this incremental cost.
Yes, the 22 will be added to that long-term cost. Yes.
Right.
And it'll be spread over that period.
Right.
Out to 2030.
So Joyce, this is Don. Let me ask you a question. So with the additional $22 million in long-term debt, was that factored into the analysis by PFM?
Yes, sir. This was all run through them via the CFO's direction. Yes.
Okay, and so back when these projects were first approved, the analysis indicated that we would still, although we were going to go into additional 8% debt, we would still be on track to retire all of our long-term debt at the same point in time that we initially had planned for. I don't know, couple decades ago, at least a decade ago, and so that was around 2032 or so. So does that does this additional borrowing meet in their PFM analysis meet that same goal of retiring the debt at the same time?
Yes, it does, sir. Those two debts for the C and this long-term debt will be retired at the same time.
I guess
At the same time as originally planned in the long-term debt retirement.
I guess
Yes,
the question that we can't answer is with the escalating cost, we don't know that we won't be back here with additional, I mean, you don't know that. I mean, in terms of until these projects are completed, we may need additional funding, right?
But yes, ma'am, by the same token, we could bring money back.
Well, that's true.
Depending on
Yeah.
what these go. This is our best estimate based on current costs and what we see in the foreseeable future.
Okay. Kent, did you get your questions answered?
Yep, I understand it. It folds into the continuing desire to be able to see that long-term projection, but that's another day.
Yeah, I understand. Are there any other questions from anyone on the committee? Okay, if not, I'll entertain a motion on this particular item.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. I think we have finished with all of the
I've got one. I've
reallocation,
got the next one.
huh? Okay. I thought that was the letter. Long-term debt reallocation, isn't that the one we just approved?
Citizens Oversight Steering Committee.
Yeah. I was just talking about reallocations. Okay, so the next item is the Citizens Oversight Steering Committee. Mr. Baroli.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Committee members. So we're bringing forward today for you is a recommended membership for the Citizens Oversight Steering Committee for the Phase 5 sales tax program to identify personnel for this committee. We sent letters to leadership across the county. We received 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 names. Mr. Hallis was mistakenly left off this list. So Michael Hallis was nominated by the Chamber of Commerce. So he would be in addition to the 6 members that are listed here. This is a very good composition of a team from a background perspective, as well as a demographics perspective. We have African-American, Hispanic, and women representation on this committee. And we're looking forward to moving ahead with this committee pending your vote.
Michael, you were just a given, so we didn't really feel the need to put you on the list. And thank you for your continued your continued service to this committee. Jeff, are any of these repeat appointments?
Mr. Hallis is a repeat, as well as Ms. Prady from North Charleston.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the committee members? If not, I will entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The next item is for the committee membership of the Audit and Finance Committee. Shauna, you want to handle that?
Yes, ma'am. So Mr. Kent Griffin's membership on the Audit and Finance Committee ends November 2022. He has agreed to extend his membership for the next 2-year term. And this is what we're bringing forward. The motion is to approve appointing Mr. Griffin to the committee through fall 2024.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks for your continued service, Kent. You're
Absolutely.
okay. Shauna, fund balance commitment.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Green. So we're anticipating that we'll close fiscal year 22 with a surplus of $10 million. This $10 million will go back into fund balance. We are anticipating this $10 million from 2 primary sources. One was the cost saving measures we put in place for fiscal 22, the hiring freeze, discretionary spend freeze, et cetera. And the second was unanticipated tax revenues that came in. And so the net of those two pretty much ends us up with a $10 million surplus for 2022. These are unaudited financials, so we have not closed the books yet, so it can slightly change. But in general, we're asking that the committee would consider to commit this $10 million to fund balance for ESSER program sustainability. This would be for approved prioritized projects. And this would begin our plans and efforts to hedge the funding cliff that's anticipated in September 2024 when ESSER funds sunset. And so the motion is for the board to commit fund balance for ESSER continuity and stabilization.
And this is just for our committee to recommend to the board, right? Because I think it's out of our scope as a committee, but we can approve this recommendation to go to the full board, right?
Correct.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Are there any questions or any additional clarification on what we're being asked to do? If not, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I guess this is, I was just thinking through this as we talked about it last week, Shauna. I guess this is kind of like the first step that we're taking, looking at sustainability for our ESSER efforts. I mean, we don't know exactly what the needs are going to be, but at least we will have this amount as a set aside.
Correct, but not all ESSER efforts.
Right.
The district can't sustain
All of
the $200+ million.
Right.
But for prioritized and approved projects, this is the beginning of that.
Okay. All right, thank you. The next item is the procurements over $250,000. You have the list on in your packet. Are there any questions about any of those? Mr. Welcher, do you have any comments about any of those?
No, ma'am, this is just a list before you for the week ending September 23rd, 2022, and we're seeking your approval to move forward with those procurements.
Any questions from the committee? If not, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next item, Wilker, is the SWMBE report fiscal year 2022.
Yes, ma'am. The report before you for the fiscal year 2022 it shows that we issued 1,064 POs to different vendors, which 466 were to SWMBEs. We spent a little over 336.8 million, of which 277.2 million were available to spend with SWMBEs. And of that, we spent 92.9 million with SWMBEs in FY22, which came out to 33% of our total spend. We exceeded our goal by 13%.
Any questions? What do you consider the biggest challenge with this, with trying to meet the, I guess we have two goals, one 10% and one 20%, but Mr. Welter, do you have any thoughts about the challenges of accomplishing this? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Wayne, I think you're muted.
I think you muted.
I'm sorry. Going into FY23, based on the approval of our new code, our goal is 10%. So therefore, FY '23, we're seeking a goal of 10% instead of 20%. So I think that's the biggest thing that we're working with now, whereas the challenge is not as great as far as that 20% goal. So we have a 10% less goal to seek this year.
When can you remind me why the goal's gone back from 20 to 10?
Well, because of the procurement code being approved, the code was approved at 10%. And that's what the state has established, a goal of 10%. If we do anything different, we will have to seek approval for that. And then we also, based on this disparity study, it has come out that in order to have a goal that exceeds what has been established of this 10%, we have to have a basis to do that.
Got it. Now I understand why that was framed as a part of the previous presentation.
Yes,
Well, and I think it's a combination, in my mind at least, it's a combination of what we are required to do and what we will strive to do, because even though we are only required to do 10%, I mean, we should aim to do more than the 10%.
Yes, and that has always been our goal, to do what is fair and equitable for the district. One other thing that I do want to note here that has come out of the new procurement code, where we were required to do an annual report, but going forward here, we're required to do a semi-annual report. In essence, we have to report every 6 months on the SWMBE progress. So therefore, a report be coming for you for the first, 6 months at the end of December.
Okay.
So you should have a report for the going in the January audit and finance meeting.
Okay.
Just
So-
to add,
Ms. Williams and then Mr. Kennedy.
thank you, ma'am. Just to add, going back to the disparity study. So when I mentioned earlier, there were some things course study was being completed. This was one of them. And we also had engagement with the state that clarified that the goals were 10%. They clarified the policy, the law that we are supposed to abide under, and the procurement code, in the new procurement code and the existing procurement code. So unless we have an analytical approach to changing the 10%, that's why we went back down to the 10% based on the disparity study and conversations with the state.
So do we have any, I don't know if this is a question for Wayne, but do we have any problems if we end up at 33% next year, even though our goal is only 10? If we end up around the same spot, we're not going to be exposed to any legal liability.
I would say no. I mean, exceeding the goal, the only way I would see that there's a problem is that we circumvented our processes to get to that goal. But if we're within our processes and that is the goal, and that's what we end up with participation, there's nothing wrong with that.
That makes sense.
Mr. Kennedy?
Thank you, ma'am. So I would also say that within the lengthy disparity study report, there's a section, recommendations, conclusions and recommendations that have extensive recommendations on how the district can approach its SWMBE goals beyond what we are currently doing. And it includes a number of recommendations that I think we will be considering.
Okay, thank you. I think that if I remember correctly, it was more of a board request. I mean, CCSD school board requests from that we tried to exceed that 10%. And I think that's where that 20% came from. So, okay, anything else? Mr. Welcher?
No, ma'am. Thanks for your time.
Anything else or questions for Mr. Welcher? Thank you very much. We appreciate your report. The next item is the capital projects report. Ms. Costello.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to present the August capital projects report. Our revenue collections for the month were 5.1 million above our 2% projected. Our expenditures for the 2010-2016 program were zero. Expenditures for the 2027 through 2022 program were $3.3 million. The expenditures for the 2023 through 2028 program were $2.1 million. The expenditures for the 2023, 2028, the long-term debt projects were zero. The capital maintenance 8% funding was zero in expenditures, and this program is financially closed as of this reporting cycle. Fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 22 program is wrapping up. A year-end recap will be presented to the board in November for information, also at Audit and Finance prior to that. And the fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 23 program has commenced and it's on its way. Happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Any questions for Ms. Costello? Thank you, as always. Appreciate your report.
Thank you.
That concludes the public items. We have 3 items in for executive session. Thank you for those of you who are not participating in the executive session. Thank you for your attendance at this meeting, and we'll see you maybe next month. Those that need to be on the call will be invited to go to a Okay, thank you. So I will call the meeting back to order in public session. We received information in executive session. No votes were taken, but I will entertain a motion on item related to D1 contractual matter at this time.
I'll move to approve the lease extension.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The next item is item 19, D4 contractual matter. I'll entertain a motion on that. The Esther property, is that how you pronounce that? Costa?
I'll move to approve.
It's Costa. Costa, okay, thank you.
So
Second.
moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
And the final item on our agenda, item 20, is the D4 contractual matter, Lakeside property.
I'll move to approve that as well.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
I've got the best committee in America, I know. With all those items, we're still, dealing with decent time frame here. Okay, so that concludes the executive session items. And so we're gonna determine the items to go to the board. Shauna?
Thank you, Ms. Green. Items 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 18, and 19, and 20 under exec session.
Everything.
Everything.
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, any questions, comments from committee members? Our next meeting is November 1st. And so if nobody has any comments, Mr. Kennedy, anything? Mr. Barori? Donna? Ms. Williams? Well, thank you for your attention and thank you for being here, and I'll see you in November.
Thank you all.